This is Fishing World's On the Source. I'm Zach Panarados, caught straight from the dead horse, seeing food through the lens of some of Australia's best restaurateurs, chefs and industry's finest who love fishing just like me. We find out their processes from the ocean right the way through to the kitchen and everything in between. Let's sink our teeth in. This is part one of a two-part series at Doyles Seafood in Watsons Bay, or Watto, which is what our next guest, or today's guest, Ryan Doyle, calls it. He's a long-time mate of mine, and he got the name Rambo because as a pup he'd venture out into the family farm and nothing but a fox whistle and a firearm, carrying out goats that probably weighed more than him from these steep escarpments. And he was covered in blood, sweat, and probably the next month's worth of meat. And I go way back with Rambo and his family. We spent a lot of our early years on Jack Doyle's boat, having just a ball, doing a lot of game fishing. One of the highlights, and probably the best fishing trip I've ever done, was when we went from Sydney to Yamba east to Elizabeth Reef and Lord Howe Island. It's honestly a trip of a lifetime. There's an article in one of the Fishing Worlds way back on it, but basically I remember we were sitting there casting top water on the surface in 60 metres of water, catching 10 kilo silver trevally, wahoo, massive yellowfin, huge kingies, all in 60 metres, fish that you'd think would be in shallows or deep water, just because the drop-offs were such a steep ascent. It was, incredible water. Anyways, Rambo is fishing obsessed, of course. Fresh, fly, inshore, offshore, doesn't matter to him. He gets up at Sparrows every single day to bid on the freshest seafood at the markets, and then he spends all day feeling. I don't know why he's still keen, but he's keen every single day to go fishing, some form of fishing, whether it's, fly fishing for blackfish or vibing for dewies, surface fishing in the harbour, which is what we ended up doing. Anyways, I can't believe that I drove down from Coffs to go fishing in the harbour. It's something that I swore I'd never do again, especially when we hit a low point of using bait. But we got over that low point and, it was a very good learning curve for me and it was such a worthwhile trip. Had an absolute ball too. This is a bit of a passionate episode. Me and Rambo probably, bounce off each other a bit towards the end here because our main goal for this one is to show and really articulate these step-by-step industry-proven best handling tips for landing, dispatching and caring for any species of fish, not just the one that we caught. And this is to ensure the best quality yield. The taste from doing this is so different and you will understand what that fish actually is supposed to taste like. Really looking forward to some feedback on this episode. Let us know. Reach out if you need any more information. This is part one of two for Doyle's Seafood Restaurant. Let's have a crack. Rambo, what is cooking, mate?
Doing, mate. Good to hear from you. Yeah, thank you. So, good, mate. Yeah, great. They've been pretty busy here. We just sort of finished up with a busy season at the restaurant. So, over the Christmas period, and it's been full on. So, good.
I've known Ryan for a fair chunk of time, so I've heard him this time of year get rather fatigued because of these graveyard shifts. What happens with the graveyard shifts to let everyone know how hard you go over the
mate, it's just obviously it's a really good time for fishing too, around December and January, and all my leftover energy is spent fishing, but it's not much. I spend most of my time sleeping and working, and a lot of oyster opening and filleting fish, and we get pretty busy.
Filleting them all night, or like getting up at stupid hours.
Super early and trying to get the good prices because it can be a difficult time of year. Because you get a lot of fishermen going away on holidays, and so there's competitive prices. So you're in there in the markets and you're just looking for the best purchase you can make, or buying off fishermen direct, and you have to be they're coming in at early hours, or truckloads are coming in early hours, it's all hours of the night that things can happen. So and that's a better time to be dealing with your seafood.
You've got the restaurant, which is like iconically situated at Watto, and then you've got the takeaway, which is where the ferry bridge people drop when they're going to and from Manly or whatever, and then you've got the
Yep.
actual market, which is part of, the where all the
Yeah,
seafood comes in.
we have a wholesale processing factory down there where we're doing a lot of wholesale and then all the supply for the restaurants. We formerly had another little restaurant down there where we were opening dry shucking a selection of oysters all over Australia. There, that was great. People that would know that. Maybe some listeners might even recognise it. That was a great little place we had there. So we were very busy working in that. It's gotten a little bit quieter now, but we're still focusing a lot more on the restaurant now. So yeah, it's always full on. The big restaurant, a lot of supply needs to happen, and ensuring it's at its best, and so a lot goes behind the scenes really, which is what I'm mostly doing in my family restaurant.
Yeah, it's a family restaurant, and there's so much
Yeah.
lineage. We'll get to that in a second, but like having
Mm.
the market, I mean, it's cutting a fair few of like the middleman out, where you're having to ensure that it's been looked after. That you're getting it from those boats, and then you can process it yourselves. Like you'll do a shift in the restaurant, you do a shift down at the market, you do a shift in takeaway, and you've sort of it's the whole chain, and you guys get to quality control that whole process, which is pretty important.
Yeah. No, it's definitely very unique that we have a factory processing our own seafood in the markets. There's no other restaurant that does that. We buy directly off fishermen. Also, there are a lot more restaurants, especially upmarket restaurants, that are doing that now, buying direct off fishermen, which is a great thing that I love to see, because that means that we're getting more of that direct sort of, and getting fishermen to care about their product and knowing they're giving it to someone who wants a good product and they're not just doing whatever. But obviously the markets is a big part of it too, where we're buying pretty much, fishermen are bringing the product into the market in the auctions, and then we're purchasing it in those auctions straight up once they put it in there. So it's pretty direct stuff. So normally a lot of restaurants will buy off suppliers or something, off a providor, or so we're not doing that. We're doing all that work ourselves.
Like, is it?
Oh, mate, I started working down there when I was 14 and full time when I was 17, and it's chaos. It's absolute chaos. And you've got every kind of, they're all Aussies most obviously, but every kind of ethnic background. Like, you've got all the Vietnamese and all the Chinese, and then you've got all the Lebanese, you've got Italians, Greeks, all heavily, a lot of their cultures are heavily seafood oriented. So they've, obviously all the communities in Sydney, you get all of that influence and exposure. And it's just madness. It's good fun. It's great. Me and my old man and my brother, we love the energy of it. But it's intense. You have to be ready for it. Every morning you're in there. You're in there early. You're in there at like 4 or 5 in the morning, and it's full on from the get go. You just got to go and check. You'll just see every morning's a new day. You never know what you're going to see. It's really exciting in that way. And you go in and you just don't know what's going to be on the floor there, or what fishermen are bringing in, or might be something really exciting, like occasionally maybe some unique species you don't often see. Like I recall we had I don't remember the length of it, but it was huge, a big oarfish. I don't know if people might have to look that up, but and it was, I remember it took 4 of us to hold it up in the length. And you see just some incredible things like that. We bought it specifically because when you see something unique like that, or something like an oilfish escalar or something unique like that, and just, you'll get someone. Just unique species that you might have never sort of encountered. You physically see that, and it's great just to, even if you see it, and the different product, the different state of product. So that's definitely an experience that I've had in seeing the process and how it's utilized by so many different type of people from different cultures, from different viewpoints, chefs. There's all kinds of people buying in the market there. There will be chefs that go in and buy for their restaurant too. It's very rare, but that happens. So got a lot of exposure to the way that fish is being dealt with too. I mean, sure, you go into that a bit later on, but definitely that it gives you a good idea of how you can really screw it up if you don't deal with your seafood correctly, and how all different kinds of fish need to be dealt in a different way and respected in a different way. And it's changed a lot too, even in the small time I've been there.
Let's talk about it, because it's important, and like we will talk about your particular process later on, which a lot of it is fully science backed. implementing that ourselves. But like when you're at the auctions, like you're not just going, oh, this is a rare fish. Like you must have to know the fishos and look at the meat and what are you looking for that goes, okay, that's at a good price. It's been looked after. It's going to come up good in the restaurant. Like,
Yeah, well, funny enough, there you go. You've got every box of fish that goes in there, or every big tuna or whatever. The boat that's come from. The fisherman or the cooperative that it's come from, and they're just getting not as great prices for their seafood, and we will refuse to buy from certain suppliers simply because they just do not look after their fish, and they deserve every bit of it. It's sad to see because fishermen are they're trying to make ends meet all the time. They're like farmers. They're the primary extractors of a resource, and they're doing it tough, and they can do really well if they do it right, because it can be the difference of getting $1 for your fish or getting $10 to $15 for your fish per kilo in the market price. So that is something that has been influenced me in my own fishing journey also, because seeing how badly it can be done when you've got fishing boats that just literally you can see that they've just chucked their fish on the deck and walked all over it and it hasn't had contact with ice until it maybe came back to the docks or something. You can see that being done, and just how it can be done by individual guys out there who have started to adopt these techniques, which we're going to later talk about with you. Especially Japanese fishing techniques that they utilize every technique you can to create a product that's going to be world above what you're going to end up with if you do have no respect for your catch. Yeah.
I know you're into your hunting and stuff. So like,
yeah.
When we talk about meat, people will go and spend X amount of dollars on this dry aged meat, or, we have talked about dry aging on the podcast already, but like, these quality meats, but it doesn't seem to be translated into fish, but you really do get what you pay for. And like when it comes to recreational fishing, like if you're going to spend a day catching a fish to eat, taking 5 minutes, I know you can do this whole process like to get it as premium as possible in under 5 minutes now. It probably takes you a couple of minutes now. Seeing the man in action is something to behold, by the way, but like people just don't choose to do it. There's this whole like idea around, I've caught a fish, I can get another one really quick, because there's this idea around, the best time to catch a fish is straight after having caught one. But if you're trying to eat it, that's not the way to go, because the difference it makes in the end result is gargantuan. So let's have a yarn about Doyles. Where did it start? How long has it been around? Like, give us the rough logistics of how it's put together.
Yeah, so it's got quite some historic roots, really. So it was my great grandfather, Henry Newton. He was just a fisherman in the bay here in Watson's Bay. His father actually was also a fisherman. We don't know the history before that, but his father was actually the first recorded catch of a black marlin in Australia. And he knew it was significant. He took it, he was fishing off pit water. He took it with him. He didn't sell it, and took it into the museum in Sydney. And there was a fellow by the name of Maclay. I don't know, you'll see a lot of scientific names named with him. He was kind of like Charles Darwin's era, He was sort of classifying fish, and he classified it as a distinct marlin species, but later it was merged as a black marlin. But so it's quite a bit of fishing heritage in my family. It goes back all that. That's 1850s. So then his son was Henry Newton, who he was living around the bay, fisherman. Fellas would come out from the city just for a day trip, like rich businessman or whatever, and he'd take him fishing, and then he'd come back to his little hut in Vaucluse Bay, and his wife, Hannah Newton, would cook the fish and scones for him before they left to go back. So and then they through that they sort of just, I guess they thought, well, a lot of visitors to the bay. It used to be a bit of a holiday spot even back then, a day trip kind of for people from the city. We're talking like 1870s, 1880s. So in 1885, he purchased a lot of land in Watson's Bay, right on the beach there, which is the restaurant now. And they had a little tea room cafe, and they just did visitors to the bay would come and have some fried fish, and then they'd have scones after. sort of like a stop after there before they got the ferry back. Yeah, and it's still going now to this day. It was doing the same thing. So we
And
had
like
pretty much what's that?
well, the rep of that restaurant is like unparalleled. Like I think your old
Yeah,
man was
yeah.
telling me like the Queen's eating there, and like
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
I don't think people know about that, but like it's a shame we haven't got really a great recorded history of it. But I've got a lot in my head, and I actually mean to go and talk to my granddad and get everything recorded down because I should do it because he's got a lot of history that he has. I've probably haven't even heard out of him or my uncles and my dad, but yeah, like they're back in the so the rest was pretty continued all the way through from then. We just had a period in the Depression and the wartime when my great granddad went away to fight in the war, World War II, and in the Depression, and they just couldn't afford to keep the restaurant open, so they had to lease it out to a Frenchman. So there was a French restaurant there for a little while in the sort of I think it was in the 50s or something, 40s and 50s. So you often hear people might say, "Oh, it was an Italian, it was a French restaurant before Doyles," but that's not true. It was actually leased to that chef, and my great grandmother was like living in the place still, and I've heard stories where she'd go down and tell him how to cook. He's some French chef, and she'd tell him how you're doing it wrong and all this. So he'd probably mad, but apparently I think she learned a fair bit off him too. But yeah, so it's just been handed down. Very very basic cooking in the beginning. Obviously, it's English style cooking fish, but really well. They knew how to cook fish. They ate it every day. My great grandparents and great great grandparents lived into their 90s, and we're talking people that born at the turn of the century. And yeah, so obviously they were very healthy. They were eating fish every day, and yeah, and so then into the sort of the 60s, 70s, my granddad and his brothers, Peter Doyle's his brother. So there was four brothers. They all sort of got the restaurant going again pretty well. They started having a bit of success. Opened up another bunch of other establishments around the city. And yeah, Doyles became known as the place to go. We're talking back at a time when there weren't many, fancy restaurants back in this day. We became the place to go. Celebrities, anyone through the period of the sort of 70s and 80s and sort of late 80s, it was known that you took someone to Doyle's if they, if they came to a musician or a famous person or something. So the list of celebrities that have visited the restaurant is just unbelievable. It's like just never ending story. My great grandmother was like, sitting on the lap of famous people, chatting to them, yarning with them, just like musicians and actors and everything. And it has that history. Yeah, so
it's that when you walk in there, like it's such a beautiful building. You can just feel like that there's so much culture like oozing out of the joint, and like
yeah, it does. It has so much history, and yes, there are ghosts in those walls that could, the fly on the wall could tell so much they saw. And yeah, there are literally ghosts in the. There's my great great grandfather haunts the room upstairs. It's a historic building. It is. The
like
foundations are original. Yeah, and yeah. So
every one of
it's
those like people in your family have told yarns across the different age groups and like passed them
yeah,
on. And like I would love to know like how they have snowballed, and like now you're getting the stories from your great 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 grandfather who just must have been saying how good the fishing was, or like
yeah.
whatever it is. And I we'll keep talking about like where you are now, like how the restaurant's running now, and like obviously you got a lot more quality competition, but you're still like implementing the same recipes because they're just timeless. But you've also got some other stuff on the side as well, like new chef implementing like cocktail bars and stuff like that, and trying to
Yeah,
not just reinvent the wheel, but sticking to that traditional, just beautiful seafood that you guys are so known for.
Yeah, well, that's it. No, it's not, it hasn't changed at all. Obviously the city has changed, and now when people come to Sydney, they have a lot more option of where to go, and that's great. That's amazing. I'm always for more restaurants, more change, more competition between establishments and restaurants means that we keep driving to become our best, and that's a great thing, and that just means that generally, it's not the celebrity. Like people don't know of Doors. It's like when you get there, like some celebrities drawn straight to it. But it is still a place that a lot of people come, like famous people rock up all the time. It's known for it still. People have great memories there. People will take their grandparents there who've been there, like from overseas. Like I'll be overseas and in England, and someone will go, "Oh, Doyle's like it has that. It has a special place in a lot of people's hearts, and that's what amazing about it, and it's continuing
the
and
harbour
still
too.
in the family. What's that? Then still in the harbour. It's still a great, yeah,
You got like a crazy
yeah,
view.
yeah. It's a gorgeous spot,
It's an
and
experience.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, and we have moved with the times in many ways, and we also have many classics still on the menu. So yeah, it's always about changing and adapting, and yeah, it's still an absolutely unbelievable, beautiful place with like amazing food that is unrivaled in many ways to anywhere I believe in Sydney. And I'm a bit biased, obviously, but you're going to take your
Have you
family
ever
there if they're
left
visiting
Watson's
Sydney.
Bay before?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. But
This bloke's
yeah, I feel
eating
like
all
that
the
sometimes. It is. If
water.
anybody has been to Watson's Bay, they would know that it is a kind of place. It's kind of like a little slice of paradise, but it's quite a little bubble. It
Yeah,
sort of feels like you're not in Sydney. You're right. You can see the city, but you don't feel like you're in a city. And that's what
yeah.
I
I used
grew
to
up with, and
hate
that's
driving down
I feel privileged for that. Yeah,
like
yeah,
I used to live in Ramick or like Bondi area, and driving there just like felt like I was taking so long, but it's only like 15, 20
yeah.
minutes or whatever.
It's geographically, it's on this little peninsula, right, jutting out in the middle of nowhere. If you want to order Uber Eats, good luck. Like at a certain hour,
Yeah,
it's sometimes the reception's even pretty crap there. Yeah, it's funny. It's
but
really quite like that, but I think that's what makes the
let's
place special. So yeah,
let's just have a yarn about um we'll talk about some fishing in the harbour in a sec, but like I know that
mm.
how much of a connection Doyles has to the Sydney Game Fishing Club, and that's where I sort of really grew a passion for fishing. That's sort of where we met. We did a lot of fishing back in the day, game fishing. I'm not too sure about the word game fishing anymore. That sort of doesn't resonate so much with me. But like we did trips from Sydney Game Fishing Club. We took a boat. Jack Doyle, your cousin, took that up to Yamba, and Yamba across to Elizabeth Reef, and then Lord Howe. And like it was probably the most incredible fishing trip we've ever get the chance of experiencing. But like yeah, that whole game fishing was so fundamental to your family, and yeah, do you want to speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the game fishing club has been there for a very long time. I don't know the actual. I should know that the genesis of that place, but it's been there. I know it's been there since the 30s, and most likely long before that too. Really famous with Bob Dyer, is it Bob Dyer and Dolly? I think they were famous like
Yeah,
game fishermen. Yeah, so he was a writer, right? I think I don't really know much about the history of that,
and
but
there was
American
like a
guy.
massive bluefin tuna caught off like the 12 mile, wasn't it? That
Yeah,
was the
it's got
record,
quite some
main
interesting
record.
records there. Yeah, yeah, it does. And I think it was known
Crazy.
back in the day as somewhere if you flew from like maybe the States or Europe, England, or whatever, and you had a bit of money and you flew into Australia. Obviously Sydney was an accessible place to fly to. You'd come there and you'd go to the game fishing club down in Watson's Bay, and that was known to go out and hunt big sharks and all that kind of. We're talking
Yeah,
like the
so
1930s, 40s, 50s. Back in the day, there's a funny story. This is how different times were back then. In the 20s and 30s, I know of fishermen in the bay that used to go and target dolphins out of Watson's Bay. This is in the 20s. Used to go and target dolphins, and they'd go out and harpoon the dolphins, and they would cut the heads off the dolphins on the boat, and they would remove all the porpoise teeth, and that was sold in the islands in the Pacific Islands as a currency. And they would get a lot of money for that. That kind
what?
of stuff happened back then. So
That was
imagine
like
that
a dead
happening.
mint.
Imagine that happening. Imagine how people look with other kind of fish
Yeah,
species and things. No,
there'd
it was
be
all about being the
pretty
big
cool.
hunter, being the big tough man who goes out and gets the shark. And so yeah, it was big culture that it was very famous. They'd hang big tiger sharks or whatever down at the big sharks down at the club there. They have a weigh-in station on the wharf, and that was a famous place. People would come down from everywhere to come to see the big denizens of the deep that they had hanging up there, the big gaping jaws. We've got some photos down in our fisherman's wharf there of some of that history.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
cool.
yeah yeah, it's got a lot of history that. So yeah, definitely, it's always been a link with the game club, and obviously, like I was telling you, my great grandparents were all fishermen, and that hasn't changed over the generations. It's always been fishermen at heart. We've been restaurateurs second, and fishermen at heart for all those generations. So obviously, we were living in the bay right next to it, so a lot of us have partaken in that game club history, and especially my generation, my uncles and my cousin have all been notable members of the club and fished out of there, and that's how you obviously, we met and you did a bit of that. So a lot of history there with that. Also, the bay had a lot of fishermen back in the day that used to sell fish, even up to the 50s and 60s. That was a common thing down by the tree near the Fisherman's Wharf. There was a tree there that they used to sit under and they'd sell fish there. So they were kind of like the last of the great fishermen of Sydney, like they or on a southerly buster, they'd just be the local police constable would be bloody, getting ready for all the brawling that would happen on the beach because they'd all be drinking the rumbos and getting into it, because they couldn't go out fishing. But yeah, that culture existed there too. So the bay has a lot of fishing culture that I feel I grew up with that sort of hangover from that. Like you still hear the stories of Sooty Jack. He lived in his boat and he'd go fishing out, and like that wasn't long before I was born. That was that kind of stuff was happening, and all my family have that sort of culture and that history. So very much grew up with the fishing and the sea, and connected with that. So the game club is a big part of that.
I just want to say, like, the game club, it's kind of been a really important stepping stone in my journey, because man, we were just so naive. We used to go out and just kill shit and just not think about it. Like we're teenagers and just doing what everyone else is doing and trying to impress or trying to get in this culture of, fucking let's get into it, You get a bit of maturity about, and you start realizing all this meat that's going to waste, or why am I doing this? What am I actually getting, the nourishment from this fish that I deserve or it deserves and to be respected. It's kind of been the seed that sprouted this podcast and idea.
I think you've got to think about how fortunate and how blessed we are that we can go out in the sea, get a bounty from the sea. That's not everybody gets to experience that, So we are already so blessed to be able to do that. Show some goddamn respect, for the fact that we can do that. And now that we're starting to, like you said, as we got older, we realized that we have a lot of influence that different to back in the old days when they were just now we've got the science behind things. You see depleting fish stocks in places in the world and the ecological fallouts from not really looking after what we have and the natural resources that we have. And I think our generation is definitely, the previous generation, especially ours, is definitely seeing that we need to be more, careful with what we do and more respectful. And it's just having respect for what you've got, being appreciative for what we've been gifted with, as we get older, it's definitely a thing we've been, when you're young, you're kind of you go out, kill everything. You have that kind of real brawny sort of attitude, but definitely it's been a change in us. I agree with you. And that's how we're sort of sitting here today talking about this. Really is.
Well, I'll put my hand up and say I did some shit I'm not proud of, and
I
wish I was educated before doing that. And I hope there's lots of young people that listen to this and start to put some of this into play, because it gives you a new connection to that fish, especially when you're eating it and it's been done the right way. Your family and your fishing's so sick to hear about. I remember seeing your dad down at the market's just filleting fish, and then the next thing you know, he's out all afternoon with the fly rod catching blackfish. So, do you want to talk about some of the fishing you actually do? I know you love your fresh, you love your salt, you love your game, you love your inshore. You'll have anything that has scales on the end of your hook, and you just love it.
I love doing any kind of fishing whatsoever. If there's a pond and there's something in it, I'll catch it. I was in Argentina one time, and there was this fish in literally water 20 centimeters deep, and I was out there trying to catch the thing, and the blokes are looking at me like, "What are you mad?" It's once you're a fisherman, you're a fisherman. I feel like once you start to limit yourself, you don't grow at all. Even if you want to target one fish, I think fishing is about understanding the entire ecosystem and connecting with every part of it, and that doesn't have to be fishing. Sometimes it can be just going and observing something is fun. If you can do that, I think that's really So I do everything in the harbour. I'm mostly fishing in the harbour. I fish inshore snapper and go for guineas, off the reef and that, up inshore. But a lot of harbour fishing. So I really enjoy in the winter time. I'll do a lot of fishing for blackfish, just from jetties and wharfs or from the boat, something like that. I really enjoy that fish. I do a lot of fly fishing and bait. Which is something that I've done since I was young with my old man. It's always a good one. And then in the summertime or the other warmer periods of the of the year, I'll be doing a lot of fishing for kind of like what we would consider our trophy species in Sydney Harbour, mulloway and kingfish. But yeah, I enjoy targeting basically anything I can go for, and trying new techniques and I think that's part of what we've actually been talking about before is how everybody's so focused. Say, for example, in Sydney, everyone's so focused on trying to catch a kingfish, or mulloway's the second one, but they're a bit trickier to sort of wrap your head around. But even the kingfish sort of thing, kingfish are a great, amazing fish to catch, great tackle sports species, and great to eat. But I think that we sort of should be trying, if we're getting fish for the table, trying to think outside the box a little bit, putting less pressure on one fish, and that's what I definitely do. I try to. It's exciting once you eat something different. It's exciting to see what it tastes like, how you can work with it to make it taste good. Quite often, a lot of fish that we refer to as rubbish fish or mother-in-law fish, if we really think about it and put our heads to thinking about it, we can actually turn it into something quite palatable, or even sometimes surprisingly better than what we normally eat. So, I've done it, and I ate a lot of seafood, and I can ascertain to the fact that it works. It's targeting and eating different fish. Yeah, it's a possibility. So I think everyone else out there, give it a go, try it. So that's what
this is my perspective of what you're trying to say, observing how you've gone about things. Like, you could easily go up to the restaurant, go order a top quality piece of barramundi, John Doyle, salmon, whatever, snapper, and it'll be perfectly cooked, and it's going to be from a good source. But you'll go catch a mulloway out the front and you'll release them just like they're your pets. You love those atomic wives, pulling them around for them. That's something that I've done plenty of stuff with you. But you'll go catch a blackfish on fly and take that home potentially, or you're targeting Taylor, you're looking for silver trevally to actually bring new recipes, bring new ideas into your home, because that's the spice of life, is actually trying new things and then finding what works for that. Because let's face it, if you're a punter and you don't get a fish that often, actually targeting some of those species that get less pressure, you're way more likely to catch one. And if you know a recipe that's going to fit that fish and how to cook it, you are actually way more likely to feed your family quality good.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Most of the family, they probably don't know what fish you're bringing home. You can tell them it's anything. You tell the kids that it's chicken and they'll eat it if they don't like fish, Cook it a certain way like they eat chicken, fry it in a panko crumbs and call it chicken. Their kids, 6-year-old kid, will eat that and go, oh, it's yum, Tell them it's some fish, they won't want to eat it. But it's the same, the wifey or whatever, and you come home to say it's whatever fish, you don't have to tell them that it's no good or good. Work it out. It's going to be good because you're going to do the right thing with it, and you're going to cook it well, and then you're bringing home the bacon every time you go fishing. How many times have we come back embarrassingly without anything when we intended to get feed? It's all of us, not even the best fishers. We all have those days. So if we can start, expanding our opportunities, why not? Why wouldn't go and catch kingy and then go and catch something that you can keep home for the table after, and then you get to have two different types of experiences. And
let's get into some more poignant questions on the actual harbour, because right, I used to live around your area. Now I've moved up to Coffs. You've come up to Coffs, and I know we've had some fishing for snapper and you've caught your PBs. I've caught my PBs up here, and we had some crazy times in a couple of weekends you've come up. Tell me, do you think Sydney Harbour is a good fishery?
You're putting me the test here. I honestly would say that Sydney Harbour is a surprisingly good fishery for the amount of pressure it receives. We have to then think Sydney Harbour is a huge ecosystem. It's one of the deepest harbours in the world, if not, I think the deepest. If you look that up, you might be able to fact check me, but it is one of the deepest. So think about that. Think about how many species are in Sydney Harbour. It is, and it's getting better with all the change with the commercial fishing lifted and better control and pollution, which we can do a lot better with. Looking after our waterways is the biggest thing. Pollution is the biggest part of it. But I think that Sydney Harbour, surprisingly for what it experiences, is a great fishery. Saying that, if any of you know, you've gone and done fishing outside of a metropolis like Sydney, and you've fished normally in Sydney, you'll realise how much easier it is to catch a fish. It is a challenging place. And I think one other thing I believe maybe is that a lot of fish can just have wisened up a bit. A lot of it's been proven with trout in dams and rivers that heavily fished areas, they do wisen up a bit. They learn. They're not silly. Fish don't have the memory like they always used to say. Goldfish in a fish bowl, swim around and lose the memory. Yeah. And so like some kingfish, if you've ever fished with them, you know how smart they can be. Their eyesight's great. They can pick up things that they detect things that they know something's up. It's been proven that with extra boat traffic, how mulloway fishing can just decline because the mulloway react to boat traffic. It's been proven. I know there's been studies done about that. I'm sure it's true with all fish. So I think that's a little bit of Sydney Harbour too, is that a lot of the resident fish are a little bit wiser with lures and with techniques that certain people use. You'll find that the charter guys will often be fishing lighter, using smaller sinkers, using lure techniques that are not utilised by the people, trying from different angles, trying different things. That's fishing.
I feel like
saying that, yeah.
Well, yeah. I just feel like some of our best fishers have probably come out of Sydney because of how.
Well, that's it. Yeah, It trains you to be a better fisher. Yeah.
Like we'll talk about our experience when we did this shoot for the mag and in trying to catch some Sydney Harbour fish to take to Doyles to cook up with Adam. But I've fished there my whole life. You've fished there your whole life. A trophy fish there compared to somewhere else is not maybe comparable, but you really have to get your 1%ers right to actually have success. So we'd try so many hours, and it was pretty cruisy because we just jump on the boat from down at Watto and you'd be in good zones pretty soon enough. And there's people that know the harbour and they usually are the ones that are having success regularly. But yeah, don't be disheartened. I moved to Coffs. I still have days where I don't catch shit, but I have way more days down in Sydney where I didn't catch shit. So you got to sort of keep at it, and you got to persist, and you got to find the right techniques for the right conditions, and they're constantly changing. The fish are always on the move. You got to look out for this stuff. So let's talk about. Actually, I need to hear another story from like some stupid yarn of one of the old fellas saying some, how the harbour used to fish or something. Have you got one bit of a gold nugget before we move on?
I don't know. I've got a couple of like little ones. I probably there'd be some better stories. If you ask my old man, he's a better yarner than me. He came up with some good ones. But I have heard a story of me and my uncles out fishing off the rocks, the drummer of South Head, and one of them is a particular good drinker. He had his case of VB on the rock above him, and he's got his VB tinny in his hand with his rod in his other hand. Wave comes in, takes him out, goes in the dip, comes back up, holds his rod up in the air. Then he's got his VB in the other one. And he said, "I've still got the most important thing with me," and he survived a nearly complete wipeout. But got some good stories of local fishermen. A lot of local fishermen used to go out of the bay fishing for Traglan back when they were in good numbers. There used to be an economy for them, and some crazy stories of them fishing out there, catching all dewies too when they were schooled up on the inshore reef, so long reef or down off Coogee. And they quite often told me that they would have their lunch when they ran out of bait. So they'd have their little red frankfurts. And one bloke told me, he said, anything that's red, they'll be all over it. And he used to just put little red frankfurt on, drop them down, and catch dewie after dewie with those little cooked frankfurt, little red, what do you call those little red sausage things?
Yeah.
And
But photo of the bloke with the two big snapper caught out of Sydney Harbour. Then I don't think he was fishing from a boat even, and he just had like two big snapper, like filthy big ones, like 10-kilo ones. And that's from taking a black and white photo. It's just like that harbour is such an incredible system. It should really be fishing like the best fishery in the world. It's just
like I told you, that's it. It's an amazing geographical feature, really, and it's a fish haven. It's a huge, deep harbour with so many different types of habitats and a huge nursery. And exactly, it should be fishing better, but obviously the pressure. We really should be looking into that. Like, why is it not being as productive as it could be? And I mean, we've had a lot of changes that have helped things, but maybe we could.
And I've just got to say one thing as well. Like, I know there's a lot of fishers that are doing stop the lockouts and that. And I understand that as well. But you look at a place like Coffs Harbour where there's, Sydney Harbour's got so much ground. Coffs Harbour's got the islands, got so much ground outside. and a lot of it is
Yeah.
actually part of the green zone. And that the flow over effect of that has been incredible. Just like how in Sydney Harbour they stopped the trawling, and how
Mm.
like the impact on people catching meter kings in Sydney Harbour on the regular. When I was a young
Mm.
fella, like that rarely happened, and now that's happening really common. So like making
Mm.
these changes that people are like, oh, we can't accept change and it's going to ruin the whole thing. In time, it actually makes it such a big difference on how good it is. Like, if you
Mm.
weren't able to fish certain outer areas or certain inshore areas in Sydney, in time, the spillover effect of like spawning fish and juvenile fish being protected in certain parts would just make a big difference. And I think that a lot of people are just happy to jump on the crowd and without
Yeah.
doing the research on how it would actually benefit them,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
has already happened in the harbour.
Yeah, I understand there's a lot of fear with things being sort of taken away, privileges being taken away. Obviously, we had that big sort of stop the lockout thing happen in 19, I think it was, when there was a proposal for green zones. I mean, green zones are proven and they work, and we're a strong community, and we're not going to if we allow that, there's not going to be further change because we won't allow it. But we're only going to help ourselves if we let some areas be recruitment zones, and they work. It's been proven up and down the coast that they work. It works in New Zealand. It works in other areas of the world, and also just releasing big fish. I think it just should be a standard thing. I think when we get those trophy
Yeah,
fish, they should just go back in. They produce so many more eggs. Also, the fact that they genetically, when you've got a big fish like that that survived for so long, we bloody owe it to bloody live anyway. But genetically, it's got superior genetics in surviving and growing big. So why not? That's like when you got your tomatoes going and you pick out your best tomato seeds for the next year. You're doing the same with a fish. If you leave it to breed, it's only going to produce stronger, better, faster growing fish. And it's a super breeder. It's got so many more eggs. It's been disproven that old fish don't breed well. They breed way more eggs than a little fish does. So
that's
yeah,
exactly right,
definitely
mate.
all for the protection zones and for releasing big fish. And yeah, it's going to change, but it needs to change quicker. Um, why would you want to go out 10 times in a row and catch a bunch of small fish when you could go out every day and catch big fish? Why
Yeah,
would you want most of us are catch and release fishermen. A lot of us are anyway now, mostly. And we just, we've got the Instagram, we've got the camera to take a photo of a big fish. There's no reason to bring it home, you know, um, especially when the little fish is going to taste just as good or better. So, like a legal little fish, not saying undersized, but yeah. So, yeah, I definitely I'm all for those rules. And Sydney
yeah.
does
Well,
need
that's
that.
like old Charles Darwin theory of like, that's why I don't kill flies, because every fly that I kill is a slower fly than the fly that I couldn't kill. So that I'm
That's it.
breeding a stronger race of flies. So I just leave them alone.
That's it. You
Um,
let them go, and
anyways,
that's fish
let's
that
move
you
on
fooled.
because
Yeah.
Mate, I came down from Coffs, believe it or not, to go fishing in Sydney Harbour just to try and
Yeah.
bring something back to the restaurant. And the whole idea was to to really knuckle down on the science behind it, the process behind it, and why you need to take these steps to get a superior product. And if you don't do this, or you do some parts of this, you can do things, you can implement little things that will make a difference. This is going to be the whole process, start to finish. That is the best. And you don't have to do all of it, but whatever is accessible to you, that makes it, a thing. But far out, we tried about, we had
Yeah.
an afternoon and a morning to try and catch some fish. And we had ideas to, get trevally and see how that would go as sashimi. We cubed up for them. I remember we were vibing for brim and flatties, and it was just shut down. It was one of those days, and it was like, not like we don't know what we're doing. We know the spots, we know how to do it. And what else we do? We're looking for schools of surface fishing.
Yeah.
That's something that you really,
Yeah. Yeah.
do a fair bit of. So, like, can you
Hmm.
sort of go through, like, when you're in Sydney Harbour targeting surface fish, what's a good way to go about it?
Yeah, so it was. I remember, if I recall, it was sort of early spring. So at that time of the year, you're mostly sort of trying to target. If you surface fish, you're targeting salmon mostly.
Yeah,
We
salmon
get a
and big
good run of
schools.
salmon in springtime. Yeah, big schools. It's been not great. Wasn't great this year, but previous years. You get big big schools of them, and they usually end up filling the harbour up by mid-spring, but they usually start off the headlands and that. But anyway, we went out trying to look for them, and we actually went around the headlands and no luck. But generally you want to be they're going to be working in the wind, salmon particularly. But like if it's a windy day, which most often you've got some wind there, the fish are usually using the wind to keep that bait up on top of the surface, and it can't really push against the wind. And they're pushing towards the wind quite often, especially salmon. You'll have different situations where the fish might be still, or in a certain where the currents are doing something, or they've got a bait ball worked into a little tight spot, and they'll be coming from all directions, or it might be scattered. But generally, what you want to do, because you're going to be drifting that way, is you want to be positioning yourself upwind of the target, drifting down onto where the fish are. So then your cast is going to have a lot more impact. You're going to be able to cast further down straight over those fish, and you're not going to spook those fish. You want to, as soon as you stop, you want to switch your engine off. If you've got an electric motor, it can help you to keep you in the spot there and positioned in front of them. I don't have one. I'll just be switching my engine off and just drifting onto those fish, casting onto them. And if the fish are working and you can visibly see them moving in a certain direction, this is very true of salmon or bonito or faster moving species like mac tuna, you want to be sort of anticipating where those fish are moving, because if they're moving in a big group a certain direction, they're going to be off wherever you cast at them very quickly. So you will sort of almost get your cast directly sort of ahead of them and come across them or through them, and have your lure or your imitation fly or whatever in the right position right in front of their mouths. Quite often when the salmon this time of year are eating very small bait, you're almost just hoping that they just sort of swallow it in their mouth, because quite often they can be really tricky. If you're experiencing no hookups and you're struggling a lot, keep casting, because eventually you're going to fool a fish. But quite often you can get...
we tried hard.
That was kind of one of these days. So we were doing that.
Birds, and that's one of the other ways you can identify them, is looking for those birds, and there's so many birds in Sydney Harbour, and to actually know the ones that are feeding, usually they're ones that are a bit not traveling at height, they're lower because the salmon are pushing the smaller bait usually to the surface, and they don't have to dive far to get it, because a lot of those bays you make up to 5 meters deep you're fishing, and so they don't need to lunge down to their prey or fall down to their prey from a high height.
You quite often find the seagulls might be high, circling high, and that can mean that they're looking at a bait school that's quite deeper down in the water. That bait school would obviously be something very visible to them, a bait ball or something that's quite large, and that means that they know the fish are going to work that up to the surface at some point, and that they can then go hone in on. So it's also worth watching for seagulls high. Sometimes they can do a weird thing where they just fly in the wind, but once you work it out, it's quite an obvious thing. But like you said, most of the time you're looking for those birds just hovering above the surface. Then you're going to see the telltale splashes. Sometimes fish can be just doing little swells, so they can't making a hell of a lot. But that's if you are out to catch a surface fish, go for a surface fish. That's what you want to be doing, is you want to be looking for those birds, because they're going to be the first thing you see from a certain distance.
And then the reputation of salmon, it's not like we're going for them to catch a feed. We were like, okay, last resort, let's go catch some surface fish, because we're fishing for food. That's what we were doing. If we're seeing surface fish, we could potentially catch a tailor or a bonito or a striped tuna or something else that
or a kingfish.
Reputation, kingy. And we stealth is the crucial element here. So we were using Bass Day bungee cast, which is like a bullet shaped lure that small profile, quite a bit of weight. I think they're 38 grams or whatever they are. Casts a really long distance on light line. You're not going to get reefed by a lot of those fish. Kingies obviously will go, but the whole idea is that we want to maximize your cast, get upwind, find the schools. A lot of them, they're so used to having to duck and dodge, dive, duck and dip, whatever it is, dodgeball. All these big ferries and stuff coming in the lane. So finding the sheltered bays, or like you said, using the wind. If the wind's coming into a bay, that might push the bait into those bays. So sometimes it's not the calm bays, but it's actually the more wind affected bays that are going to be a good option. But it's tricky because they're just up and down, whereas other places that don't get so much pressure, and that's not even from people fishing, that's just boating pressure. they might be
Yeah.
visible for longer. We were seeing them for 5-10 seconds. And I remember one moment we actually let's just cut the boat and drift for 10 minutes. And sure enough, a school popped up within 50 meters of, because we knew we were in a rough zone where we were fishing. So,
And like I said, it's consistency. If you're not getting results and you're determined to catch fish, you know that they're there, they're on the surface. Really, I've found if I know I've got nothing else to do and I want to do that, if you're consistent and repetitive with it, and you have the patience, you'll eventually get a fish making a mistake. If they're tentative to take your lure, try changing your lures. Obviously, we were using a great all-round lure in those slugs that you said, the gorilla lures. But also, I'll often switch to a Bass Day sugar pen, because quite often I'll find a surface lure. Sometimes they will only see a small part of the profile of the lure from below, and so that looks like something smaller to them, and they'll just reaction strike that if they're eating small bait. Sometimes there's another thing that I've heard my mate Justin Duggan referred to as shocking the flock. This will become a bit of I think he started that name, but it's quite a good term to describe when you just throw a large lure into a group of fish that are not reacting to your lure presentation. And if you throw something big and interesting, like maybe a big soft plastic or a big popper or something like that, although like the sugar pens work well like that, the fish might just go, "Whoa, hey, that looks great." And they just change their action and their decision to eat it. So yeah, just mixing it up. And that's what we did. We were consistent and we got one.
And we got a few, but we
got a few. True.
We don't want to bring this back to the restaurant.
We were hoping for something else. We were hoping for a tailor or something even like.
I didn't know. Yeah. I didn't know about the reputation. I had no idea that they were edible. Like I heard for years that this is a dogfish. It tastes like mud. They're like got this grey texture in the meat, and they're just inedible. Don't even bother. I had one mate that cooked it for me, and it just tasted like butter, so it was delicious because he literally fried it in about 2 kilos of butter. And anyways,
poached in butter. Yeah, we can't go with that.
And then we were like, fuck, now we need to catch one, and we couldn't catch one. We tried for like 2 hours, and we couldn't. And the sun was just going down. I got some great photos of you in the silhouette, and we caught this fish, and we were just like, thank God, I've never ever been so happy to catch.
Everyone's been there, mate. Everyone's been
when
there.
When there's millions around you, and you're just not taking it, and it took.
Yeah.
Now this is the really important stuff that that is really going to help people, and a bit of cultural change around. We've caught this fish, and it doesn't matter if it's an Aussie salmon or whatever fish you are trying to eat. It could be a freshwater trout. It could be, or you do some slight different things for freshwater fish, but it could be a bream. It could be a big kingy. It could be a snapper, whatever you're catching. These are the steps that you need to follow if you want the best procedure, the best quality meat or the yield. Now, I'm a PE teacher, so it's a bit of a big thing for me to talk about this. And if there's any of my students that listen to this, they'll think I'll just tune out for the next 5. But I really want to touch on the whole idea of energy that a fish produces. So like energy comes in a couple of ways, and there's 2 main systems, right? And it's called respiration, where we have a product that the body has accessible. It's called adenosine triphosphate. It has 3 phosphates at the end, and that's called ATP. And basically one of those phosphates break off, and you have ADP, which is produces energy. Now that can be resynthesized, so that phosphate can rejoin the ADP to create ATP, and then you have energy that can be renewed. Now that energy can be renewed or resynthesized in 2 different ways. One can be with oxygen, and then there's no byproducts. And that's usually for like endurance stuff. So like, if I was a human, because humans have the same energy sources, it could be a long distance run, like a marathon. So a fish cruising around just, in the current, not really doing much feeding, is going to be using their oxygenated resynthesis of that ATP, where the other way it can happen is without oxygen, so anaerobically. And when it's done anaerobically, it's more readily available. It's not as long a process. So for like a sprinter in a human sense would use a lot of anaerobic energy. And then you have, for a fish, maybe it's feeding, or maybe it's been hooked by someone and it's just putting all its effort into like big strenuous bursts of energy. So that's the anaerobic element. the thing that happens with that is you get this byproduct of lactic acid, and lactic acid builds up and it creates a bit of, it's called acidosis in your muscles. And that's, basically it's called hitting a wall where you got no energy. You can't feel like you can keep going. It's actually, you can feel it. It's a physical pain. These two energy systems are never working on their Pat Malone. They're always in tandem. And so, there's going to be a bit of buildup of lactic acid, whatever. So at any given point, but it's going to be one energy system is going to be more, predominant than the other. So it begs the question when we're fishing, like if we're going to use light lines, and in Sydney Harbour, you really do have to actually catch fish, but you're going to prolong that fight, which means you're going to prolong the buildup of hormones and the buildup of lactic acid in that fish. Now, if you were a human and someone shoved your head down a toilet, you're going to freak out. So as well as lactic acid, you also got these hormones that are of stress, and stress does not lead to good meat. Just like in the way that, a cow is put down and the processes involved in that to de-stress that animal actually makes for more tender meat and more palatable meat. So, it's kind of a bit of a thing about, well, what's the point in catching things on light line? Sometimes you have to, but sometimes if you can go heavy, it's actually going to be better for that meat. Getting sidetracked there, when you kill a fish, right, it obviously can't breathe because its gills aren't underwater, so it can't actually bring that oxygen in. Now, there's this whole thing around rigor mortis, and some people think it's actually a good thing, but it's actually the early stages of that cellular level of that fish breaking down and the degradation of that fish. It's decomposing. So rigor mortis, we actually want to delay the onset of that, and a lot of that is through delaying the work of the anaerobic ATP. So the ATP, even though you've killed this fish, ATP is still breaking down, and lactic acid is still building up. So respiration can be slowed down by reducing the temperature of that fish. It can slow down cellular processes, and that's in any sort of thing. That's why there's a big emphasis on recovery and stuff and ice bars and this and that. For humans, well, we're going to talk about ice bars for fish in a moment, but we want to get rid of that rigor mortis. We want to delay everything we can, and there's a lot of processes that we can do to avoid that. So, let's talk about how we do it, because and like I'd love to keep rabbiting on about this. Maybe there's a few listeners that really want to learn about the science behind this from go to woe, and we can maybe do a podcast on that where we chat to it. But it's a couple of people that are well versed on it as well. But lactic acid and like stress hormones like adrenaline. I remember I caught a mahi-mahi that got half eaten by a shark, and the chase was on for that shark. I could see, the mahi was jumping out of the water, and I remember tasting that mahi-mahi, and it just tasted so tough compared to what I was used to with a mahi-mahi. And that's basically adrenaline, because the fight was quite quick. Okay, so let's start with this fucking salmon that took us so bloody long to catch. How did we land the fish, and why did that make a difference?
Yeah, so we obviously had that in mind, didn't we? Yeah, to land it quickly.
What was that?
And we had that in mind already to be reducing the stress of that fish from the get-go, from once we hooked.
Yeah.
So
we used the net, yeah?
Yep, we used the net. Obviously, you don't want to just be lifting that fish out, throwing it in the boat, having it jumping around everywhere, causing damage to the meat, making it stressed out, sitting out of the water. You net the fish and you're holding it in the water there. You can remove the hook even in the water, which we did, which is a great method to then, get have it without the hook dangerously in the way of you handling it. Then once we have it out of the water, we have a soft surface. We were using a little mat. You can use like a yoga mat, something like a little bit of foam, or if you've got anything, you can use or did we use? I think that time we had a jacket, didn't we?
A jacket or a wet
or
towel.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a wet towel. Yeah, anything. You can't. You obviously want it maybe to be a bit wet would be a good idea. Depends on what material it is, but just something that can cushion it, so you're not just sitting it on the hard floor of your boat. And then our first step was to perform the ikazima, which is
Yeah.
the
But before
yeah.
we get to that, though, let's just talk about like, okay, so why are we going to the effort of netting this fish? It's not flapping around on the hard deck. We're putting onto a soft thing, and you could even throw a wet towel over it just to avoid it smacking around. And
Yeah,
that's really gonna,
that's a good technique. Cover its
yeah,
eyes with a wet towel. You'll notice that a fish will calm down a lot when you do that.
because any like if it does that, it's gonna bruise, right? So
Yeah,
that and bruising is blood entering the meat. And you can see, like, a lot of spearos, they'll spear directly into the meat, and you can see the meat around where the spear has entered the fish is damaged. And that's because it's got water onto that meat. You don't want water on there. You want to avoid any water touching the meat where possible, but also it's bruised. There's damage there. So where there's blood in the meat, that can lead to bacterial growth, which is ammonia, which leads to that fishy smell that we really don't want. Like fishy, like people used to say, "Oh, you put lemon on fish." That's it. But actually, that was the thing that happened back in the day for people that weren't looking after fish, just to avoid that fishy fish smell. But fish doesn't really taste or smell fishy or taste fishy when it's done at a high level, this process. So we use the net, we put it on something soft, and we use a wet towel. If you were going to take a photo of a fish, you probably wouldn't do all this because your fish looks a lot nicer. You get a photo with the hook in it or whatever, how you want it to present it, and then you put it back in the water to release. But this is for food, yeah? So this is one of the things that probably some people just refer to as icky. Tell us about ikijimi.
yeah. So I think a lot of us are quite familiar with this now. I mean, it's something that's obviously been done all over the world. Sticking a spike in a fish's head to kill it. I mean, it's something we've probably done for you know eons. Has a lot of names in different cultures, but the Japanese took it to a next level in the last couple of hundred years with these processes that they use, and it's basically putting this sharp object into the cavity of the brain, the nervous system, central nervous system of the fish, and creating enough damage there that you completely obliterate the function of that organ of the fish. Therefore, the fish's nervous system, its consciousness is completely finished, and it's dead quite quickly. It's once you know where to put it, the right correct spot, which is quite easy to learn online. You can look it up. Many fish have different spots, but they're quite often very similar locations. Spike goes in, inserted, move it around in that very softly in that area, and you'll see the fish react. It will flare its gills, its eyes will widen up, its mouth might open up. That's quite a good indication that and it will go quite limp at that point. You basically kill the fish
Yeah,
there on the
and
spot.
like for me personally, it was a lot of trial and error on this, and it's basically a
Hmm.
spike. So you can buy ikijimi spikes, and they're just basically, a spike. But you can use a knife if you don't
Highly
have.
recommended spike, but yeah, exactly. A knife or a screwdriver, anything you got, anything's great. That has
Um,
that
and
kind of
and and
method.
like one of the things I've found is like if you follow the lateral line of most fish and sort of where it dissects the gill line of that fish, it usually gives you a rough area, but it is a lot of trial and error. And I know you've done it with a lot of different fish. So, like, could you give us an example of, say, doing it on a kingy or a blackfish even, and like that exact spot where you'd
So
do it?
both of those fish, they're very quite similar, really, and exactly like you said, yeah, just follow the gill plate up. You'll see there's like sort of a larger sort of C sort of shape above the gill plate, that sort of section there, just sort of to behind the eyes, and just directly above that. So I kind of discount from up the gills and across from the eyes, and there will be a small sort of depression, and that's generally the area you've got to target. But yeah, like Zach said, it's a trial and error. Like you said, it's trial and error technique. But there are some online resources that show a lot of species of fish where to. I don't know. Maybe you'll be able to put that in a link or something.
Yeah, cool.
Because I don't know of the exact site's name, but I can find it for you. But you probably know of that, and it does have a big database of certain, and it shows a general idea of where you should target to. Once
So
you know it, it's quite easy, really.
Yeah,
It's not too hard to do.
so far we've landed the fish onto a surface and straight away. This is all happening in
Yeah.
10 or 15
As
seconds.
soon as you can, because every moment you leave it, as you described, that fish is releasing those hormones, that stress, that lactic acid buildup. So you want to, the sooner the better. And we're talking
And,
seconds.
and
Yeah.
so like I said, we don't want any blood in that fish, or like some people say, oh, if you get a tail, you need to bleed it. It's with any
Every
fish.
fish.
Every
Every
single
fish.
fish. So
Yeah.
step one is landing the fish. Step two is
Yeah.
ikijimi. Step three is
Yeah.
bleeding.
Yeah.
Now, how do you bleed a fish?
So the fish's heart will be pumping
Even
regardless
with
of
dead.
you spiking that brain. It's we'll get into that a little bit later anyway. But a lot of the bodily functions of the fish will still be conducting all of their natural habits, and the heart will still be moving and doing its job as it was before. So that is great for us to be able to expel that blood that's still getting pumped around. So we're getting the fish immediately after the ikijime, and we're opening up the gills. Some people like to cut and separate the entire lower part of the gills there. I mean, that's fine and it's effective, but I prefer to just slice gills. So you'll see when you open up the gill plate of fish, underneath you'll see the gills. Quite often they're shaped in like a C shape, or they might be really like a V shape, generally like that. I just cut in the middle, get a knife or scissors, and just cut them in half so they separate like that. You won't see it go like that, but that's the kind of the thing we want to do. On either side, doing that will be more than enough to let the blood flow out of there. That's an area where the blood is constantly running through. It's the large artery of blood movement. From that, you want to sort of have the fish in some kind of liquid can help, but it will bleed a lot anyway. But if you, by then having that fish, maybe you could chuck it in a bucket with some water or stick it back in the net and just leave it in the water. That will help you bleed it out a little bit too. If you, or put your hose from your saltwater hose into it. And it's not a necessary step, but I would suggest it just to do that for like a short duration, maybe 5-10 seconds even, just to let that blood
And
flow
you
out
did
a bit.
exactly that. You did that.
Yeah,
So
we
I
did that.
remember
Yeah,
I was getting the shinkijimi equipment. If it's good if you
yeah.
have another person to help you. You
Mm-hmm.
bled you did the gills, and I believe did you slice the tail? I know some people do slice the tail.
And then
And then
you can also slice the tail. We did that on that fish actually. Yeah, that is another good technique is cutting that artery down on the bottom of the spine, and that will go into our next part of the shinkajime step. But yeah, that is also the caudal artery there will like open up. They'll let you bleed out from the other end of the fish. So that will just help in that bleed out process.
and that's really important to note is that we're looking at that arterial blood, and obviously if you're not cutting down at the tail, then that blood has to travel the whole way up, and the simple fact that the heart is beating is an indicator that there is still energy being produced, which means it
Yeah,
has to be anaerobically reproduced, or like obviously there could be still some oxygen in the blood system, but predominantly it's by this time it's going to be anaerobic. That lactic acid at this stage is still building up, and that blood can be a place where ammonia is produced or that bacteria builds up. So we want to get as much of it out as possible. So an insertion on both sides of the gills and at the tail, you'll see blood squirting out, and that's usually arterial blood, which means it's actually oxygenated blood that is pumping from the heart around the body, and that's really good.
and you
And the
don't want to
longer
make
you leave it,
yeah,
less pressure because the heart will slow down. So if you've
yeah,
waited too long and you try and gill your fish, you won't get that squirt. So that squirt
yeah.
indicates that the heart is still pumping. So that's a really good indicator of timing.
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah, so that process of and cutting down on the tail is just a matter of making that incision just under the scales, going across an angle, and you'll get to that sort of section of the spine there. You'll be able to open it up, and from that you'll be able to see into the caudal nerve, which runs straight up the fish. And this is the other nervous system of the fish that's still active, still working a lot of the fish's functions. So think of it as like the other nervous system of the fish that's creating all the movements, helping with all the functioning of the fish. That's still active because we've only spiked the brain in the ikijime. So then the next step, taking it to the next level, is the shinkajime, which we're going to then get this this long metal rod. There you can purchase them online. You can purchase the whole set that does all of the process, the kajime and the shikajime. I've got a website too that I can provide for Zach if you want to have a look into that. And so then you'll we're just running this metal wire up this caudal nerve, up the whole spine of the fish, and taking out that extra central nervous system. So it's a matter of either inserting from the brain cavity or from the tail, and we're running it up the entire nerve. Once you get this process, it's quite a trick to sort of learn the trick of the knack of it, and you need the right size for the right fish. You run it up and push it in and out, and you've destroyed that. That means that the fish has been, every kind of nervous system activity in the fish is completely obliterated, and that fish is completely in a dead state from that moment, from that get-go.
So you're severing all a possible movement, that like an involuntary spasm.
The involuntary spasms in the muscle, in the in the organs.
And like watching you do this, it was like you just knew the spot straight away. But I imagine that this process took a lot of learning and a bit of patience initially. And I know that you hadn't done a salmon when we did it, because obviously you wouldn't. At this time, we had that idea that you wouldn't take one home, but I've seen you do it on other fish that you really knew, and then that's sort of translated to your ability to do it with the salmon. Now, like for me, I've seen a lot of this, and I've seen people do some parts of this, but I have never ever seen or even heard of people following Shinkejimi protocol, and that's SHINKEJIME, Shinkejimi, and it is amazing. Once you know how to do it, once you have the tool, it makes a huge difference, and it really gives you a good understanding of the anatomy of that fish, finding the sweet spot. You can go from the nose almost, but you're running basically along the spinal column, or you can go through that whole.
I think it depends on the tool and the fish, but some tools they'll help you sort of insert it from the brain cavity. But if you're just going by the wire and that sort of more basic technique, the tail is probably a bit much easier method to try and get it up that entire nervous system and push it up. There's also a trick with having the right size wire for the right fish. So I would suggest if you're going to be knowing you're doing a big fish and then a little fish, you might want to branch out into getting two sets. But the website that I'll give Zach, they have a lot of different sizes, and they suggest the type of fish that are recommended for each one. But you can kind of get an all-rounder, which we had, which will cover like sort of medium to small fish sort of thing.
Yeah, cool.
Which is most people are going to be catching.
And there are like commercial boats that I know now that I've done a bit of research that actually do this, and that's great to hear that there's. It's industry standard with tuna now, but you got to and now guys are doing it with all fish, and like I was saying before, how we're buying off fishermen direct, and a lot of the top-notch restaurants around Sydney and obviously beyond are buying direct off fishermen. These fishermen are up to date with all of this, and that's the only reason these people think about buying off them direct, because their quality is next. So, like, if you want restaurant quality fish and do it yourself, this is what you've got to do. This is what the pros are doing it. The pros are doing it, and the chefs are doing it. They know more than us. So. It's their business. They want to stay alive. They need to do the best. They need a good product for people to eat it. They're not making this stuff up. You cannot get restaurant quality meals at home with a fish unless you do this. So it's been so eye opening for me to speak to different chefs, speak to people down the market, people like yourself that have always been looking for this, but the recreational angle, it's time to bring that into our lens and our scope to implement some of these things. Now, there's a lot more steps that we go through after this next one, but I'm going to do a few of those with Chef Adam from Doyles. And now let's just talk about, we've done our Shinkejimi, and I still reckon you've done this process all within a minute. It might take you 5-10 minutes the first time, but it's worthwhile to learn the process. What's happening next? It's going into something very special.
So we've prepared ourselves a nice slurry. So we've got ice. We add it to salt water. So obviously you can do that on the boat. You've got some kind of container you're chucking your fish into, whether it's one of those big cooler bags that you put your fish in, or it's a compartment. It's going to be quite a big area. So a bag of ice is enough. Chuck that in, fill it up with maybe 2 to 1 parts of salt water to the ice. And the idea is with the salt water, you're getting that water really cold. salt water's freezing at a lower temperature. So that's just bringing it down that much colder with the ice in the water. And obviously the salt water, something that we need. We don't want to be chucking fresh water all over this fish. It's a saltwater fish. Come on. We don't want to be putting fresh water. What lives in fresh water? Microbes, bacteria. We want salt water on this fish, something that's lived in all its life. That's what you want on the fish. So by making a saltwater slurry, it's essentially getting put in really cold salt water. And as soon as we've bled that fish out, perform that ikijime and the shinkajime, bleeding, shinkajime, straight into the ice slurry, and that fish's temperature is going to come straight down to a position where the whole fish is going to be nice and cold and well preserved for when you get back home.
What we're doing there is we're slowing the metabolic rate, so their ability to respire. So there will be limited lactic acid buildup. It will be really slowed down, and the rigor mortis will be prolonged by this stage. We will talk a lot about the impact of water on the flesh and what process you can then do once it comes out of the slurry with Adam, because a lot of people like to wash fillets and all sorts of stuff, and there's a whole science behind why that never happens, and we'll go to that in the next episode. This episode, we'll stop it at the slurry in terms of the protocol, but it's actually one of the main things in how it is able to cool down that fish is another science word called conduction, which is basically the fastest way to, transfer heat from one object to another. If you are touching it, that's when the most rapid transition of heat from that fish and cool from the ice slurry will get transferred, and reducing the core temperature of that fish. You said one bag, and that's because we were going for, small fish in the harbour. If you're going for something bigger, you need to make sure that there's enough ice to fully submerge that fish. So you want the conduction to be around that entire fish where possible. That's really important. You see people, get 5 bags of ice and they look ready, and then they just lay the fish on top of it. That's not doing the work it needs to be doing. If you can't do the slurry, at least you got the ice. You should be able to do the slurry because you're on salt water for starters, but being prepared. Have an esky with you. Have a bag that you can fill with some ice, whether it's, even a Coles, some sort of a bag that can hold a little bit of temperature. Be prepared if you are fishing to eat. There's a difference between catch and release or fishing for photography. Those that do not put the effort in with the slurry or at least ice, it almost becomes inedible and in comparison. And if you don't know, well, trying and then maybe challenging yourself to do this, like most people run a slurry these days, but doing the whole process and actually maybe catch a fish, do one without, do one with, where you've gone through the whole protocol and actually compare. Like you will see the texture, the change in the texture, the change in the flavor. You actually really get the flavors of that fish coming through, and it allows you to work with the fish and develop, dishes that, highlight that species. What I wanted to finish with, Rambo, before we actually talk about why your name's Rambo, was what do you think, like if people's, the culture change shifted and people just started giving salmon a go as a species that is edible and targeted more commonly for that reason, what do you think would be the benefits?
Well, obviously it's this quite the obvious one that we're not putting pressure on one fish species. That's, quite an obvious one. But I think that the biggest part of it is just that people expand their minds and understand the entire ecosystem they're fishing in. They become better fishermen from the result of that. You'll see that you'll become a better fisherman the more that you try to learn about other fish species, and you'll become a better cook. And it'll just make you strive to do better in your kitchen and on the water, and I think that's just something that everyone wants, right? And it's making more awareness in the fishing world, much more awareness towards the environment and to the fish we're catching, and that's just going to be good for everything.
That culture is the same culture that, why we used to kill sharks and dump them out in the middle of the ocean and just not think about it. If
Yeah,
if I bought a
like I
Aussie
told you
salmon
that story
for
about the
people,
dolphin.
you know, yeah,
Like I told you that
it's
story
got to
about the
start by
dolphin.
just
People would be
accepting
like going,
change.
"Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, yeah, yeah." I mean, that looked crazy to us. They cut the head off a dolphin as the teeth out, but people probably, I'm hoping in 50 years' time, people will look back and go, "Look, they didn't even they didn't even kill the fish properly and do the right processes when they. Can you imagine how disgusting that used to be? They'll look like that, People will look like that in the back at us bloody cavemen, thinking, "Oh, what the hell were they doing?" And I mean, it's a culture. None of us can blame ourselves. We've all done it. We've all been doing it. But don't you want to be a better fisherman and a better cook? Don't you want to eat better food? And try new
well,
things
I see these
like
huge,
I
I see
do.
these
So
huge schools of salmon. Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
like how
and
big are
that's
these
the other
schools of
thing.
salmon?
Look how much food you've got there
Like,
that you can suddenly catch easy, and you can bring home dinner every night, and your kids can eat fish every night. And how good is fish for you?
exactly,
And I said my great grandmother
and
lived to 95. We're all going to live that age if we eat that kind of fish every day. These
nothing but
fish,
Aussie salmon, nothing but
hey,
Aussie salmon.
salmon, ailer, mullet, these fish like slimy mackerel. People laugh at this, but yuccas like horse mackerel, bonito, all of those tuna species, those things that regarded as rubbish fish, they have amazing omega oils in them, fats that we need in our body that are essential to our health. And we're just passing it up for other fish, every fish is good for you, but we're all passing up opportunities to be able to put that in our diet. And instead, you're going to not catch nothing and go and eat macas. Like maybe I don't, go and eat, some junk food or something, Like,
There's nothing in between. It's either
yeah.
fresh fish
Well,
caught or Macca's.
you're not, but you're
But
not.
like
You're gonna
as the
maybe
PM feature again
you had
coming
an
through,
opportunity to eat something great and healthy, and you didn't do it just because you regard it
yeah,
as
well
rubbish
those
fish when
oily
it
fish
wasn't.
are healthier.
They are. That's what
Those
they.
oily fish are healthier for sure.
One thing that I didn't refer to before, but how the fishing culture's changed, and way back when my great grandmother was young, they ate a lot of mullet and they ate a lot of tailor. Those kind of oily fishes were much more prized to eat rather than some of the snapper was always been a popular fish. But they were more popular back then. People did assume them, regard them as a good fish, only because they knew how good they were for you. And the results are written on the wall. Like I know all of the old fishers down here in the bay that used to eat them. They all lived right old ages, and they were 80, 90 years old, walking around without a wheelchair and bright memories. That's what it does for you. So why not use that food that's there on your doorstep, there for you to take
And like
to learn how to use it.
we're decent fishers down there. You particularly. I mean, you've put more than your hours in, and so for you not to come away with anything else but a salmon,
It
I would
happens
say
to
that
all of us, mate.
99% of fishermen. Yeah,
Mate,
but
I was
like
out there the other day, and all
you
the
have the
charter
person that
blokes
comes
couldn't
down with
catch a
their
fish.
family.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, well,
I was
like
out there.
some
Yeah,
people can't do it, and
yeah, I
they
know.
come
It's
down once a month or
you have those
a
days
year,
exactly, and that's the other thing too is
and
we not
they want
everybody
to get
goes
some food
out.
for their family.
Well, that's it.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I go 3 or 4 times a week at the best time, out on the boat. But I've got the boat just here, and I devote my life to it. I love it. But some people, they've got busy lives, they've got families. I'm a young fella and I can get out and do that. But some people are busy, and they only get out once a month. If you only get out once a month or 2 times a year, why the hell are you going to go waste your time and stick your nose up in anything that you catch just because you think it's not good?
it's
Take
something
advantage of the opportunity and take some fish home.
like
You know.
a thing that resonates with me is Aboriginal culture and spending a lot of time in the top end. I'd be chasing barra or jacks in the snags, and they'd just be smashing the queenies, spearing mullet, and really targeting those fish that have a high success rate. But I'd catch a flathead up there and like, nah, that's too bony, not enough meat. The yield's not as great compared to like a big juicy mullet. And they were targeting completely different fish, cooking them in different ways, and it was like all those fish were delicious. And it's 100% culture, and I really look forward to speaking to Adam because he's going to bring. It was so funny when we dropped the salmon to him. I won't get to that story now because I want him to be involved in it where he's a Kiwi, but it was so good to see someone with a different attitude deal with this fish and be excited. And that's he's a human. He's got taste buds. and the feed that we had from this salmon was exceptional. It was unbelievable, and people would laugh at me still if I told them, go and try it. You need to start doing some different things because the results are just worthwhile and so good. We've rabbited
Yeah.
on for a bit here, Rambo. We're gonna have to cut it there. I'd love to keep chewing the fat. Maybe I'll just stop pressing record and we can keep going. Because we do love chewing the fat on this sort of thing, especially when we go on expeditions. But mate,
Topic.
really appreciate you giving your insights. Like that protocol is just so incredible. And then also hearing about some of the lineage of the restaurant and just how valuable and important that is to follow in that bloodline, to keep that restaurant alive and put your heart and soul into it. Because I see it every day, mate. Like the family and that business, it's inextricably linked, and it's like the heartbeat of what keeps you guys down there. It's so cool. Anyone that's in the area or passing through, really, if you want to go to an iconic venue, and try some really good seafood, just trust me, it is all time. I've had some.
And if you're there, just ask someone, and ask your waitress or someone at the bar, is any of the Doyles about? Because one of us will be there. If you walk down and what, as my old man says, shake a tree, a Doyle will fall out. That's how many of us are about. So don't feel shy to ask, and we'll come and have a chat with you. If you want to ask anything about what we talked about today or anything about fishing, and and quite often you'll see me walking down past the restaurant if I'm not working in there or somewhere else in the market. So I'll be walking past the restaurant to hop on my boat and go for a fish. So
Awesome.
See you down in Watson's Bay, hopefully.
Yeah. So anyone that has any questions on this episode or some insights, like obviously you can look at Cobber Doyle's got his Instagram there at Cobber Doyle. We've got Fishing World. Shoot us a message, reach out to the Doyle's restaurants. But we really want to hear what you guys thought about this. And, if you have a crack at it, just shoot us a comment. And, if you're struggling with some of the techniques, let us know, because we are doing this and we're talking about these things to try and facilitate this as a thing that is widely adopted. So I'm really passionate about it. Rambo's really passionate about it. Like we're probably, trying to get words in because we're just, so enthused by the fact of.
We want to see people do the right thing. We love it. We want you all to catch more fish for the table, So that's why we're doing this. Too. We love sharing this information and being a part of it.
Yeah. And when we say, the lockouts is it's just a question. It's just a question, and we're encouraging people to do their own research and not just piggyback on others. There is a lot out there. This is based on science. It's not just us going and sticking a freaking metal rod down this fish's back and going, that's how it's done.
Like magicians. Yeah.
But yeah, cheers, man. Have an absolute belter of a week, and you're probably up at Sparrows to go put a couple of bids on some Aussie salmon for the restaurant.
Will be, mate. No worries. See you up the coast soon.
All right. Catch you later, dog.
See you, mate.